Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Abby the food scientist, and today I have a very special guest. She is the manager of the Food Industry Training Unit at the University of College Cork, Joanne Uí Chrualaoich. Hi Joanne.
Hi, Abby. Lovely to be here.
I'm very happy to have you here. So I want to pick your brain a bit because you are sort of an expert in career development and continuing education. But first, I was thinking, could you start us off introducing a bit of your background?
Yeah, so I started off life thinking I wanted to be a scientist, and that's where my academic career started because I was good at science in school. And if you were good in science in school, you did science in university.
Mhm.
And the system we have here in Ireland is you choose your major day one, so you do, so
Oh,
you're tied into that ecosystem quite early on. But I very quickly realized I didn't much like science, which was a little bit of a problem, but I did like scientists.
yeah.
So I pivoted in mid-career to psychology and retrained as a psychologist. And where my interests fit is that interface between educational psychology and organizational psychology and workplace psychology.
Mm.
So, a logical place for me to end up is that piece of people making transitions from university to the workplace. What kind of things influence a successful transition and then a successful career after that? That's how I ended up in this space. I started with training for PhD researchers, focusing on the stuff beyond their technical skill sets. We know if you have a PhD in food science, you are good at food
Mhm.
science. But can you lead a team? Can you communicate that science? All that sort of stuff. So that's what really gets me excited. And then more recently, I've moved into a dedicated role looking at the food industry and the training we need to really drive that industry for the next 20, 30, 40 years.
Yes. That is very interesting because as a food scientist, I think a more traditional view is like if you want to be a food scientist, you go get your bachelor's degree in food science. But do you see that changing a bit?
I mean, I think what has changed is that has now become an accepted baseline. So we
Mhm.
know people are coming out of universities or colleges with a really good scientific
Mhm.
standard. And, universities are very good at what we do. We know we can stand over the expertise. Where the differentiation happens is in what used to be called soft skills, then was called
Yes.
transversal skills. Now we're mostly talking about multi or interdisciplinary skills. So, choose whatever you want to call them, but that's what differentiates. And, I'd ask people listening to the channel to think about their heroes in food science.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just the technical stuff that those people are
Yeah.
brilliant at, it's the communication, it's the leadership, it's the team building, it's all those kinds of things that are real differentiators. So I wouldn't say you don't need the food
Yeah.
science anymore, but we know you have that.
Yes. No, I agree. It's like everyone expects like you get your bachelor's degree in food science, you go get good grades, but it's now a lot more than that, like you say, like these soft skills. Or for example, one thing I really enjoy is if people are easy to work with. And that's a skill, like being good at group work and getting along with one another. That's another soft skill that is really important.
And how often do people take time? We do exams in
Mm-hmm.
analytic techniques or protein chemistry or whatever it might be. But when was the last time you sat back and considered what makes me easy or difficult
Yeah.
to work with? What do I contribute to a group situation? Where am I? And we don't tend to take that time away to think about those things and develop those skills as we do our technical skills.
Right. I agree. Or we think some people are inherently just born, they're better at speaking or they're better at group work. We don't stop and think, oh, I could cultivate that skill.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And related to that, we don't accurately self-assess.
Mm,
It's very difficult to know yourself and look, to accurately look into yourself. And again, another question for people there is, when was the last time you asked somebody, am I good at this? And it's a
yeah.
really uncomfortable thing to do. I accept that, but that kind of feedback is so,
Yeah.
so valuable.
Yes, I agree. And actually, I think so. I'm American, grew up in the American school system. Now I'm in at a Dutch university, and actually, the Dutch are much better at that than Americans. Dutch people, after any project, you will sit down and get a feedback, like direct feedback, what you're good at, what you're not so good at. But growing up in the US, I I just guessed what I was good at. No one really told me.
But each system, and it's really interesting to look at the international dimension. So obviously, I can speak about the Irish dimension, but
Mhm.
if I have time to tell you a little story about
Yes.
something that happened when I was a student. So when I was a student, I got invited to go to the Nobel laureates meeting, which
Oh.
happens every year in Lindau. Yeah, really, I mean, amazing event to go to. When I went there, I was so out of my depth and I was so incredibly in awe of the
Mhm.
North American students. They had business cards. Now, this is the 1990s. I had never even seen a
Yeah.
business card. They were going up to these Nobel laureates. They had done their research. Dear whoever, I'm a real fan of your work on something. Can we have a conversation? And I had no preparation done. I had no communication skills at that time. I was so, so utterly far behind the North American students. And that was a seminal moment for me. I said, I've got to get better at soft skills.
Yes. Yes. No. And if do you have any pieces of advice for students who are out there listening and are thinking the same thing? Like, I want to build these skills. Like Joanne said, what are some, I guess, tips or things they could do?
So, first of all, you need to figure out what are the skills that are in demand, valued, necessary. And there are loads of frameworks that you can look
Mhm.
at to do that. So you can look at, so in Ireland, we have the Irish Universities Association PhD skills
Um,
statement, which has 7 thematic areas that we can look at. And I can post these as links under
okay.
your
Yes.
video. There's also in the UK, there's the Vitae framework, much more comprehensive, but again, it's the Vitae framework, and you can look at the skills there. There are the European Commission through the Marie Curie, they have
Yeah.
skills frame. So find a skills framework and examine it. And you may say, for the career I want, this skill doesn't apply. That's absolutely fine. I have no problem with someone saying I don't want to develop a skill. Where I have a problem is if you don't consider it. So
Yes.
actively neglect a skill that you don't think is
Mhm.
important rather than never realize it should be in the mix. So start with a framework. The second thing then you need to do is assess what
Mhm.
is my current level of competency at that skill. And you need to do that at 2 levels. You need to say, how good am I at the skill? How proficient am I at that skill? And where do I need to be for the career I want to have? And do that for all the skills. And then find where the biggest gaps are, and where the biggest gaps between where I am now, where I need to be, go find a course, go find an internship, go find something that you can do to narrow that gap and get better at that skill. And then the final piece I would say is get some feedback.
Mhm.
Get somebody outside of you to give you some honest feedback on where you are, what your development opportunities are, when you're making progress, and all those kinds of things.
Yes. No, I think that's a good point because I was just thinking, on like our knowledge-based skills, we take an exam and get feedback, 100 times in a school year. But for these types of skills, you may never get feedback if you don't ask someone.
Yeah. Yeah, and and these skills are in some ways subjective, and that
Mhm.
makes them more challenging to take a look at. Now, if I put my psychology hat back on, we have some really good instruments that can be used to help people explore these. We have some really solid personality tests, we have some solid team working tests. So we can do that, but actually asking somebody that you work closely with, but not too closely
Yeah.
with. Um, because somebody you work really closely with has kind of gotten used to you and how you operate.
Yes.
But somebody, who knows you but not too closely can really give you very valuable feedback. And if we're talking about feedback, it's really important to, be ready to accept that feedback, because feedback can sometimes sting a
Mhm,
little bit, particularly if it's critical.
mhm.
And you need to let it sit with you for a little while, get used to it, and say, okay, yeah, that's something I can actually work with and something I can actually do some useful
Right.
development with.
Yes, and I've seen with feedback with students, sometimes it's better if you ahead of time say like, "We're doing feedback at this meeting," because then they mentally prepare like, "Okay, I know I'm gonna get feedback. I know we're gonna talk about my strengths and weaknesses." And then it tends to go a bit smoother. And I'm like, "That makes sense." Like I would want to prepare if someone's gonna be critical of my skills, ahead of time.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So a couple of tips in that is, go seek out the feedback so you're in control of when it happens, and that type of situation. Prepare the kind of rules of engagement is not quite the right phrase, but what are we getting feedback on? It's not just
Mm,
a big old moan that
yeah.
Joanne has, not done something. So have what we're getting feedback and make it quite specific. It should always be in the context of something that can be changed.
Mhm.
So feedback must be on behavior. I can't change the age I am. I can't change the gender I am. There's absolutely no point in criticizing me for those. So things you can change because they're behavioral in nature. Take notes, reflect on the notes, and then later do something with the feedback. And then if you're the person giving the feedback, always remember you have to do multiple positive attributes to every critical one you do. So typically you want to say four things that somebody is doing well for every one area of improvement that you identify.
Right. Yeah. Really balance it out or more than balance it out, I guess. Yes. And almost a trickier question. Because we talked about, okay, if you're a bachelor student, here's some soft skills, some different criteria you could work on. But what about the students maybe that don't take such a traditional route from like high school to college to the workforce? How are there any options they could do?
Yeah, and this is a really, really emerging hot topic in education in general, but specifically in food.
Hmm.
And again, the European Commission have invested heavily in this in the last number of years. This idea of lifelong learning with
Hmm.
multiple entry points into education, multiple pathways through education, through personalized and individualized learning platforms or pathways, and then multiple exit points, because
Hmm.
not everybody needs a PhD.
Right.
Not everybody, goes straight from school into college. People may need to take a couple of years out for caring responsibilities, for example. So all that stuff has to cater into what we produce. And the obvious mechanism for that is to build more flexibility
Hmm.
into what we do. So now we have really well defined pathways, levels of education, smaller blocks of education that you stack up together to end up with a really meaningful qualification. One of the things we're still struggling with a little bit is how to make sure that if we give somebody a degree in food science, a bachelor's degree in food
Hmm.
science, that it's meaningful, in that it's not history combined with drama, combined with
Hmm.
uh, food physics,
Yeah.
combined with microbiology, that we have to be able to stand over it as a coherent. So that's one of the things we're still looking at. But there are so many options now in terms of
Hmm.
micro credentials that can turn into college work that can turn into full degrees and programs. And this is a really exciting space to be working in the moment. We're working in it in the context of dairy, and
Oh, okay.
specifically putting together a life path approach to
Um,
learning. And one of the focuses we're looking at is work integrated learning. And what we mean by that is learning while you're at work. So some of it is experiential, what you learn actually in the workplace, but supplementing that with the more traditionally academic piece
mhm.
in a flexible manner. And it's really exciting. It's a really good space to be in. And we know there's an ambition on all sides to make this happen.
Yes, yeah. No, exactly. And I saw you are in charge of the food industry training unit, and I saw a lot of your courses aren't just always food science knowledge. You do a lot of more development like writing in food science or more professional development, soft skills type of classes too.
Yeah, so the food industry training unit, our remit is part-time education for the food,
Um,
agri-food, and seafood sectors. So our entire focus is on non-traditional learners. And we do food science and technology, we do specialty food and artisan food, we do food manufacturing, and we do the traditional food science subjects. We also do, we have a diploma in leadership, for example,
okay.
that looks at, the developmental piece, and that is specifically targeted at those early career people
Yeah.
who have a technical background, get into a company, and suddenly it's commercial sensitivity,
Hmm.
it's communicating with people who on the production side of things, so it's all that sort of a thing going on. So we have that. We also have short courses that
Yeah.
are, built together in really exciting, like ice cream science and
Yeah.
technology. What's not to love
Yeah.
there? We're trying to develop one on confectionery and chocolate,
Ah,
so that's really exciting
yeah.
to look at. But also short courses in things like project management, or as
Mhm.
you say, communication skills.
Yes. No, I think that's a good idea. And when you were sort of looking what courses to develop, did you go to the food industry and sort of ask like what skills or areas do you see food scientists sort of falling behind on, or what skills would be useful?
Yeah, so essentially, we have three really big groups of stakeholders.
Mm.
One are the learners themselves, and it has to be a meaningful learning experience for the learners themselves. Nobody who's working wants to take time out of their, often their private lives to devote to study if they're
Mhm.
not going to get something meaningful out of it. So our learners are front and center of everything we do. The second is the food industry, because they're often sponsoring their people
Yeah.
to take courses. Ultimately, they're the employers of these people, so if there's a mismatch there. And then the third really big group of stakeholders are the academic community, because we are a university based unit,
Right.
so we have to be able to stand over the academic rigor of what we do. And we're a research intensive university, so all our teaching and learning comes from that ethos of being research informed. And when you bring those three categories of people together, it's a really powerful mandate for
Mhm.
everything we do.
Yes. No. And do you have any skills that come to mind where you're like, "Oh, we should develop a course on that for food scientists," or any soft skills that always came up when you talk to companies or something like that?
So the communication and
Yeah.
communication within groups where there are differing levels of
Um,
expertise, experience. So that can be between very technical people with people who have a more basic
yeah.
technical knowledge, but it can also be the human resources people talking to the
Mm,
technical people, talking to the sales and customers people. So a classic example is, the marketing team want to put some amazing claim on the label, and the
yeah.
technical people
Yep.
say, not
Mm,
going to happen. It's, we can't stand over. And it's about getting people to speak that common language. Because remember, our scientific training is all about the peer reviewed publication.
yes.
And
Yes.
absolutely, that's important. I don't want to diss it. I don't want to cast any aspersions on that. But that's only one part of the communication we do as professionals in the food sector, and we need to kind of develop a more balanced scorecard of communication
Right.
skills.
And I noticed that especially during my master's and PhD, all the communication, the writing was how to write a journal article. And whenever, after that, if I wanted to write something for just a lay person, like a general audience, I really struggled because for years I was not taught to write like that.
Exactly. And particularly in the food sector, like this is so important because
Yes.
you're not uncommon. Every
Mhm.
PhD student and postdoctoral researcher is taught the importance of the accuracy of their
Yeah.
science and the research integrity. Absolutely important. But you say that to a layperson and
Mhm.
you terrify them. They'll
Yeah.
be scared to eat
Yeah.
anything because and it's about taking your technical knowledge, translating it, first of all, to a language they understand,
Yeah.
but also a level of detail
Mhm.
so that we don't terrify people.
Yes. Yes. Or for me, one of the hardest parts was when you write a journal article, you are very non-emotional. Like you take yourself out of it, even though like I spent 6 years doing this research. Now I'm writing it up. I'm not in that paper. But when I wanted to write for a general audience, they want to like feel emotion or they want to relate to you. And that would make me so uncomfortable because I had not done that in years.
Yeah, absolutely. And you really see that when you get people doing presentations,
Yeah.
because just as with the peer review publication, when students are taught to give presentations, I'm here today to talk
Yes.
to you about this very exciting topic. The methods we used were, the
Mhm.
results we found were. If you go out to a general audience with that type of an
Yeah.
approach, they're asleep. I mean, you've achieved something, you've put everybody to
Yes.
sleep, but
Yes.
they can't engage with that. And I often say it's communicating in a presentation. It's not a peer-reviewed publication.
Mhm.
Neither is it Dancing with the Stars,
Yes.
it's not pure it's somewhere in the middle. And you've got to, again, it's about being conscious. You've got to
Mhm.
decide where your personality sits between those
Yes.
extremes, and get comfortable with that. And a presentation, you're going to have 15 minutes for. If you're
Right.
doing a radio interview, you're going to have 2 minutes.
Yeah.
If you're doing a television slot, you're going to have 30 seconds. If you can't get your research out in 30 seconds,
Mhm.
you failed in that piece of
Yeah.
communication.
Yes. And I think one trick I used as a student was, like you were saying, like when you go to a conference, it's like a very soft voice and they're very monotoned and they just keep talking. But you will notice when you attend those, there'll be one or two speakers that captivate everyone. Like it's a totally different room when that speaker gets on stage. And I would just try to mimic that type of speaker. I'd watch like their body language, how they started it. And at first it was like, oh, I'm faking it. Like I'm not that person. But if you keep practicing that, eventually you do become like that speaker.
Exactly. And there's a lot to be said for fake it till you make it,
Yes,
isn't
yeah.
there? Yeah.
So one other topic I wanted to get pick your brain on is transitions because I know at least for me I had a couple of transitions because I did my bachelor's, master's and PhD and internships transitioning to the food industry and then back to school. So do you have any advice? I guess maybe most people might be attaining their bachelor's degree, how to transition from your bachelor's degree to your first job.
Yeah. So the first thing is to take the time to recognize it is going to be a transition. And for some people, it happens more naturally than
Mm,
others. But really, be kind to yourself during this period because when you're at school, you're told work hard to get to college. You get to
mhm,
college and you're told work hard to get to a job. But there's nothing that to get your job is seen as right. That's it. You're
mm,
done. You don't need to develop or think anymore. And you kind of land in your job and you say, right, I've laid all the pieces in place. Let it just happen. It's not like that. You've got to work at it and you've got to be conscious about it. So we're back to that idea of being conscious about what the changes are. What do I need to be able to transition? A piece of work we did recently looked at what kind of things support people in
mhm,
those transitions. One of the things is having a wide variety of coping styles.
mm,
So it really doesn't matter what the coping styles are, so long as you have a good number of them that you can access to. And there are kinds of things like, having a good social circle,
okay,
maybe doing some exercise or having an outlet beyond work, of getting enough sleep, and all these types of things are really important. But check you have coping styles to be able to do it. Have a plan.
mm,
Don't this isn't your last transition. Your start of your working life is only the start of your working life. So always have a 5-year plan. I had an email last week from somebody who took a leadership course with me exactly 5 years ago, giving me the rundown on the 5-year plan she had done
Oh,
there. And her ambition at the end of that 5 years was to be in charge of a particular unit, and she's just been given that job. But just, plans will change, life will throw you curveballs. It's not to, but if you don't have a plan, you're wandering aimlessly. But having a plan, at least you know what the direction of travel is. And we could spend a whole hour talking
yeah.
about, there's a really nice model to have a strategy on a page for yourself, to know
Okay.
what the end point is, know where you are now, know what the enablers are to get from here to there, and what the
Okay.
potential barriers are, and to just have thought about what you might do to keep moving forward. And don't lose track of your university either. We love to hear back from students when they go into the workplace. We can support you going forward, and you can support us by feeding back into the next generation and helping
Mhm.
them.
Yes, absolutely. So if I was going to go write my 5-year plan tonight, is it just as simple as like, here's where I am in 5 years, here's the goal, and then write like some steps in between, or is there more?
So the goals are the steps in between. So you start where we are now, you end up with your vision. And,
Okay.
and a really good exercise, and Abby, you are far too young to undertake this exercise, but I'll say it anyway, is to think about, and it's a little bit morbid, but to think about your funeral and
Oh
what
gosh.
people are going to be saying. Yeah, I know, sorry. But to think, so what are my family going to be saying about me? What are my colleagues going to be saying about me? What are my classmates from 100 years
Hmm.
ago going to be saying about me?
Yeah.
And think that, and that will help you decide what my vision is. And
Ah.
then you put goals, interim goals. So you'll have some short term goals, some medium term goals, and some longer term goals. And you put those in place. And then you need to think about, well, what are the strengths, opportunities that are going to help me move
Mhm.
towards this vision via these goals? And what are the potential obstacles or risks that are going to come in my way? And you can get all that on a single page. And it's a compass essentially to help you move in the right
Yes.
direction.
Right. No, no, I won't lie to you. I don't have a 5-year plan. That's why I asked that question. So I just wanted to clarify what I need to do. No, that is super helpful. And I think I have one final question for you. Just in general, if someone watches the and they're like this and they're like, today I'm going to reflect on my career and my plan, can you give them like a first couple steps or some advice on what to do or what to think?
Yeah. So like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And even if you're 45, you may want to not feel grown up yet, and use that as the starting point, um, to define, too many people jump through a series of professional transitions without strategically having a
Mhm.
direction in mind. Now, that is not to say you have to be rigidly attached to that direction. If opportunities come your way, grab them. But if you don't have a direction, you may be aimless and you may not be going. So figure out what it is success is going to look like for me in 5 years, 10 years, 40 years' time. And think about that. And then say, well, what do I need to get from where I am now to where I want to be, and start planning that. And that will be largely down to those transfer. We're back to where we
Yeah.
started, largely down to the transversal skills, and looking at, who are the people I'm going to need in my network to
Mhm.
help me move in that direction. How do I get in front of them? How do I get them to consider me as somebody they want to include in their networks? How do I communicate with people? How do I convince them? Persuasion and negotiation and all those skills that we need to develop.
Yes, that super good information. At least for me. So this has been very eye-opening. I really appreciate your time, Joanne.
You're more than welcome, Abby. It's a pleasure to meet you.
You as well. Hopefully talk soon.
Bye.
Bye.